we had the global investments in clean energy exceed that in fossil fuels. But then it is not enough. The world needs to come together and make a bigger difference happen. We need to triple our investments, as we heard being talked about at the G20 summit. And this is the context in which Enrich is happening. Bring the world together, speakers from across the world together, thoughts from across the world together, intergenerational participants, and we start Enrich with Leaders 2050, where we have the youth of the future talk about what they want from the planet, how they want to see the planet, what difference they are going to make to the planet. We go on from there to actually the Innovation Summit, which is something which we have never done before. We have had the Startup Awards, but now we have a full-scale Innovation Summit where we are bringing academia, innovators, researchers, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and industry together to find ways to make that change which I talked about happen in reality and happen in a manner which is secure, which is affordable, which is sustainable, which makes energy truly accessible and benign for the world, for the planet. We follow the Innovation Summit with a full-scale conference day, which is going to again bring the best minds from across the world, from within KPMG as well as from outside, to make the points that need to be heard about by the world across the board, from policymakers, from the industry, and from common citizens. We are going to talk about how we need to grow, but we need to grow with as little as possible so the planet stays a good place to live in, a habitable place to live in. We are at serious risk in the planet because there's so much of headwinds which we are facing to change. There's so much of misery, there's so much of trouble, there's so much of consequences of global warming. But then, we are the most inventive creatures on the planet. This is what humans are. So when we pull all of that together, our minds together, and make action happen, then we can find a way to get across this. Enrich is a platform for that. It is your platform. And I'm looking forward to all of us working together today, tomorrow, day after, and the times to come on this platform to make a difference. Thank you, and welcome to Enrich 2023.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Anish.
And I'm Apurva Mitra. I'm a partner with the ESG practice in KPMG India, and Anish is our global leader for ENRC for KPMG.
Yes,
a very warm welcome to all of you to the 14th edition of Enrich, our global energy conference.
Yes, and in fact, today we are in the main conference day. Yesterday we were at the Innovation Summit. Some of you saw that video yesterday. For some of you, it's the first time that you're seeing it because you're joining us today. And some of you wanted to see it again, as if you haven't seen enough of me. So that's what it is. But what I hope is that it is just simplified for you what Enrich this time is about. It's actually come to be a huge amount of innovation coming together. And yesterday we had a fascinating day, Apurva. I think I couldn't have expected something more out of it. But then I also realized that there's a follow-through agenda which we have to go through as we go forward. In fact, Yezdi, my CEO, is already reminding me that we have had such a great platform together with all of you. We need to scale up and make a real impact. So that's what we're going to talk about today, our issues which we are going to deal with. And we start off with this opening panel where we have Dr. Ajay Mathur, Mr. Atanu Chakraborty. I'm going to introduce them in a little bit. Yezdi Nagporewalla, my CEO, and me going to come together. So that's the plan.
Yes, and we have a power-packed agenda for today, a bunch of fireside discussions and panel discussions as well. So I'm terribly excited because this is the 14th edition of Enrich, and each version just raises the bar. It's a massive coordination effort, I understand, Anish, but it must be hard to do that every year.
Well, it is, but it's also such great fun. So thank you. Please join us on stage, Dr. Mathur, Mr. Chakraborty, Yezdi. So as we start, I'm going to request Yezdi to welcome you all and welcome our guests over here on the dais. So Yezdi.
I hope it's okay if I address from here as against sitting on stage. But distinguished guests, colleagues from the industry, my colleagues from KPMG International, and my colleagues from KPMG India, I am delighted to welcome you. This is our 14th edition of Enrich. I still remember we started off 14 years ago. I was in a different role, and I was wondering what is happening. And now I have a true appreciation of the seeds set in by Anish and his earlier bosses. Enrich serves as a platform for stakeholders across the spectrum with a view to engage objectively on issues of paramount importance and global relevance within the realm of energy and natural resources. And through this platform, we specifically intend to ideate on policies, and it is necessary now to catalyze adequate action around climate change and energy transition while balancing the need for economic growth. Over the years, we've witnessed poverty, and you can relate to poverty. For us, it's one of our prime agendas with our Honorable Prime Minister. And we've now seen a decline in extreme poverty in India. And this comes with aspects of life expectancy, literacy, and more important, access to education. Now, these outcomes are largely enabled by an economic growth, an accelerated economic growth, but underpinned by a consequent increase in energy demand. Now, this is the primary driver over the greatest crisis known to humanity, which is climate change. The impact of climate change have manifested in the form of pronounced increase in extreme climate and weather events, effectively threatening the existence and survival of humanity going forward. Currently, and these are numbers which Anish will talk about as well, the world emits 35 billion of carbon dioxide every year. And at this rate, we will definitely breach the 1.5 degrees increase in temperature over the pre-industrial levels. And as per the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we are on track. We are on track for a climate disaster. And an immediate change in course is imminent. The next few years, till 2030, and 2030 is kept as a milestone for different reasons. The criticality has also been reflected in the G20, which calls for trebling renewable energy by 2030 globally. I'm also very delighted that our Honorable Prime Minister has ably led the G20 this year and steered it and positioned it where the right issues on climate and energy are spoken about. And it's very, very timely in that sense. And while we must green up energy supplies, we must also expand the overall energy availability, since growth is imminent for a country like India. And that's where the concept of optimizing, and that's where the concept of growing with less comes into play. Because it is imminent. We will have growth. There is no question of not growing. It's also equally imminent that we are heading into a disaster, and there is no question that we are going to choose the right road at this crossroad. The rapid transformations, clean, resourceful, efficient energy systems will take center stage, and they become a global imperative, given that energy and natural resource sector accounts for 3/4 of global emissions. We will need a combination of electrification, of clean energy investments, and deployment and energy efficiency, which will become a global imperative going forward. We will talk about global investments, which is also very key for a country, for developing countries like us, in terms of investments in green hydrogen, investments in energy storage, coal gasification, and increasing efficiencies in renewable energy plants. So what are we seeking with Enrich 2023? At KPMG, we take upon ourselves a higher responsibility to bring together all important stakeholders, which encompasses government, industry, civil society, energy consumers, to structure and analyze the challenges that we have facing us. We meticulously have curated panels, fireside chats, roundtables, which facilitate a discussion on growing with less and consequent implications on all of us. Yesterday, we successfully hosted the Innovation Summit, which saw participation from policymakers, CXOs, and senior folks in the country, and they came together as part of Leaders Forum to discuss the development and the innovation-led collaborative ecosystem for accelerating energy transition. The occasion was graced by Honorable Minister of Education and Minister of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, Government of India, Shri Dharmendra Pradhan. Today, we will have the privilege of Honorable Minister Hardeep Singh Puri, whom we have seen in action in and outside of boardrooms, and we'll see him in action today in the afternoon again. The Honorable Minister of Petroleum and Natural Gas and Minister of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. I would urge you to visit the KPMG Kaleidoscope at the living rooms that's just above this hall, where we bring to you the state-of-art of technology-based solutions that have a wide-ranging application across the energy sector, as well as some of the winners of Enrich Startup Tech. So to conclude, I want to emphasize that we are almost in a state of climate emergency. The time is now, and we are at that crossroad. And it's not one agency or one individual or one country's initiative. It has to be collective. It has to be, it's rationalized, it's spoken about. We will talk about it over the next 2 days. But we have to make that right choice. We have to choose the right road with the future of the planet in mind. We are committed on playing our part in catalyzing and enhancing, on concerting the urgent need. I thank Anish Day and Apurva for organizing this along with my KPMG team. And I'm also pleased this time that KPMG's global energy team from across the world is here in New Delhi once again. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you so much, Yezdi, for the welcome address and for setting the tone of the event and the discussions to follow in keeping with our theme, Growing with Less. And now let me call Anish on the stage again. Every year he shares his views on where we are in the world that we're in, where we're going, and that personally for me, that's a very inspiring start to the day's discussions every year, so I can't wait to hear what he has to say.
Thank you, Apurva. I'm going to request you to come down because there's a presentation which is going to play out and it's not going to be easy to see on that screen. Thank you, Apurva. It's my pleasure every year. In fact, this year, I thought there's another way to do it because this year is also the year of Gen AI, generative AI. And so some of the questions which we had, and in fact, I had said that, how's the energy transition progressing in the world, in India? We'd asked generative AI, and we got some surprisingly good answers. So there is a generative AI capable avatar called Sarthak upstairs, and you must visit him and ask him the questions. I mean, yeah, it's a him, but we could do better there. But yes, it's a great thing to see how generative AI can make life simple for us. And there's a lot more, as Yezdi mentioned, upstairs in the innovation kaleidoscope, and especially the startups, absolutely mind-blowing stuff. So I must say they're actually much better than what I'm going to put up as an act, but let me get started nonetheless on how I see, just like every year I talk about how I see where we are and what we need to do. And as Yezdi mentioned, what's the path forward especially around growing with less? So, sorry, I have to get this in control. Can we just restart the presentation? This is not moving back. Yeah, there you are. So just as we started, the final question from me to Sarthak was that how was the century been? How has the century been? How has it changed? Because when we look at some of these issues, we can't look year to year. We have to look at trends which transcend time. And the way it comes out is that it's been a century of growth and prosperity. Our global per capita GDP has kind of exploded. And let's look at some stats around that. The global population in the last 100 years has gone up 4x. A combination of lifespan increases, which has accounted for half of that, from 35 years. Just 35 years a century ago, it's now 72 years in terms of average lifespan. The rest of it has come from general growth in population, fertility increases, which has been also propelled by GDP growth. The GDP has grown 30 times in the last century. So even if you take it down to a per capita basis, it's more or less 7.5 to 8 times per capita, where prosperity has increased over the past year. And the unfortunate part of that is that just along with consumption, which causes the GDP increase, and the standards of living having improved so rapidly, it causes a huge amount of demand on resources. Now, these are 4 which we are putting up. You could put up any number. We have cereal, housing, meat, cars. So it's more a little bit like people who are used to Indian lingo. It's roti, kapra, makan, especially though we don't have the kapra element in that, but we have vahan, which is quite an interesting dimension to it. So everything has gone up. The housing stock has gone up. Cereals consumption has gone up. Housing stock has gone up. Meat consumption has gone up, and we'll come to that. But beyond everything, cars have gone up massively. So the amounts of each are quite significant, but cars, 1920 to 2020, it's gone up 55 times. Now, you will always say that, how can you compare 1920 for cars? Because cars were just coming in at that point of time. But even if you take a later start date, say 1940, when cars were all over, it has grown 18 times. So that is the kind of thing which has happened. And the problem is that as you go from below to above, all of them become more energy intensive, more resource intensive. So if you have meat, for example, as compared to cereals, it's much more energy intensive, much more resource intensive, much more water intensive. And of course, about cars we know. So let's see what cars do. All of this causing a commodities boom, but especially for oil. Now, if we go, let's start with the lowest line over there, coal. Coal has gone up 4.3 times in the last 1 century. Now, coal has been around for, commercially for many centuries, 3-4 centuries. Even that going up 4.3 times adds a huge amount to the carbon stock. Our iron ore consumption has gone up 22 times. And especially the last ticker you see is the China boom, which we saw for 2 decades, which completely transformed the world in terms of how we consume commodities. And oil, as I mentioned, has gone up hugely. You can see the scale of that. It's like very aligned to the growth of cars. And that is causing the current problem which we have. And that problem, as we all know, is acute. We've really hit a roadblock on carbon, and Yezdi reminded us that we are going to definitely head towards a carbon disaster unless we do something very significant. Now let's look at what's happening on the carbon budgets, just to make it easier for all of us to put it in context. So we have cumulative emissions between 1850 and 2020 of 2390 gigatons of carbon dioxide. The remaining budget to remain within 1.5 degrees global warming is 500 gigatons, of which, basis current plans, we are going to hit 430 gigatons by 2030, where a lot of the plans are for 2030 period. And by 2032, we will breach the entire 500 gigatons which we have as reserve. So unless we act now, act today, and all of us act, we are actually in a big problem. But before we go into carbon, I wanted to remind you that we have sometimes challenges which could be even worse than carbon. We have ocean plastics, ocean pollution, we have microplastics, we have carcinogens, which I really want to talk about a little bit more. So as we go, every year we add 8 to 11 million tons of plastics into an ocean to the already circulating 200 plus million tons which is there. And that's causing havoc. That's causing absolute havoc to our marine life, and some of it is coming back into our food chain and back into us. So that's the kind of thing, just to put it metaphorically, it's like one massive truck being dumped every minute into the seas. That is the kind of scale which is have plastics, one massive truck of plastics being dumped every day into the seas. That's what we are doing to that. Now, some of those plastics are coming back to us as food and into our bloodstream. And especially when you have hot or warm water, into those plastics, they turn into nanoplastics and microplastics, which then gets released into our water chain. Now, how much trillions of pieces of nanoplastics and microplastics go in for every liter of water? And there are tests which have shown that 80% of us, at least, carry those in our bodies. And if you look at it, it's transcending. Even if you look at Antarctica, the moment you take a core out, you're seeing it full of microplastics and nanoplastics, untouched areas of the world. And there are carcinogens. 10 million deaths every year are caused by cancer. 1 in 6 deaths are caused by cancer, and many of them related to our environment we live in and the habits that we have. Let's talk a little bit about that more, and why I'm talking about this. As I said, we have a climate challenge, massive challenge, and we also have an energy epidemic which is looming. Dr. Peter Attia wrote this book called Outlive. I have read this at the recommendation of a friend a few weeks ago, and if you haven't read this, I do suggest you read. It's very well written on a difficult subject, so it takes time. But when you look at what he's calling out, he's calling them as the 4 horsemen diseases. And why 4 horsemen? The 4 horsemen of apocalypse from the New Testament, he's drawing an allegory to that. And he calls them out as heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer, and metabolic disease like fatty liver and type 2 diabetes. These are the 4 modern horsemen, which is actually taking us down off apocalypse, so to speak. All of these are lifestyle-related diseases. Every one of them are lifestyle-related diseases. 1920, we hardly had them, or much, much lesser. In a scale, it was hardly there. Today, all of them are afflicting us. So what we have to realize, and the reason I bring that to is that all of this together, is that we have to realize that the choices we make are critical. Energy, food, health, environment, we cannot see them in silos. They are all interrelated and in a delicate balance. And if we don't get that balance, we are in serious, serious trouble. Let's exemplify that through the humble hamburger. 50 billion pieces consumed. And let's break that up about what is the footprint. And I'm going to stick to carbon only for a moment for that. Various elements of various footprint, of which we have meat, which is about 3 kgs of CO2 per hamburger up to. And even then there are choices there. If it's beef, it's 3 kgs. If it's chicken, it's 1 kg. So you see that the choices we make even for the humble hamburger are the problem. And then there are the fries. Dr. Mathur, you'll recall that we discussed in your office that it takes a lot of, this is the New York Times article we discussed. And it's not the only article in New York Times. They've been writing in the last 1 month repeatedly that America using up groundwater like there's no tomorrow for making those perfect fries. And these are all choices which we make as users, consumers, which the companies cater to, which the farmers cater to. So it's about us making some of those choices to keep the planet healthy, but above us to keep us healthy. That's where it is coming down to. And this is where the concept of less comes in. Okay, and less, I'm going to come back to the CO2 emissions and talk about how we need to bring this down substantially and live within the budgets if we can, but also reminding you all and reminding myself that we can do that only if we understand that interrelation between those elements, environment, energy, food, water, and our own health. Now, 4 levers very quickly, less carbon and energy, and let's see what each of these levers do, starting with less carbon and energy, which means less fossil fuels in simple terms. Now, this is what the world has as per plans, and those plans are also not easy to achieve, but we are going to double this. But if we do double this, we are going to breach the CO2 limit by 2032, as I mentioned. IRENA, IEA, all of them says that, and the G20 communique also says that we have to triple that, okay? And that will reduce our consumption of the remaining budget, carbon budget, quite substantially. It will by 15%. The reason why I wanted to bring this before you is not to reiterate that announcement, but say that this is really, really difficult to achieve, and we need to work together. So Mike Hayes, Simon Burley, Franceli Joris, and I are working on a paper which will come out before COP28 in a few weeks from now, where we are really calling out this, and we really want your inputs into that, because we have to find ways to make this happen, because the challenges of land, permitting, supply chains, transmission, it's a very, very complex system. So just to say that we are going to do 3x is not going to happen. Those announcements, we have to find practical ways beyond those announcements. Let me go to the next one, new materials, new production methods, new products. And I'm going to pick up only green steel and green cement. The potential of that in various ways is quite significant again, 8%. Okay, now, when you look at 8%, it looks small, but when you look at, that's all we have in our pocket, okay, it is very large. And this is again possible if we make the right choices as industry and sometimes as consumers as well. So if a realtor is actually building up and decides to go for green steel and green cement, it has a big impact. And that impact is forever, because carbon gets locked in. It's embodied carbon. So critical choices that we need to make. My postulation is that all of this is not going to be enough. We need to remove carbon, because if we are not going to achieve all of that, we need to find ways to remove carbon. And the current plans are non-existent almost, 0.04 tons or gigatons of CO2. IRENA says that we have to go up to 2.2 gigatons of CO2 per year, and that would give us some little more headroom, 3%, and maybe we can do more. And here I'm much more positive. I'm much more positive because if you go upstairs, you're going to see the kind of innovation which is in action. And this is where the landscape is changing, and it can give us that 3% headroom, maybe more. the kind of innovation our youth are showing. And I think the senior leaders really need to start listening to the youth, because the landscape is changing and the youth are really finding different ways of doing things which we didn't even imagine ever. So I think that's really critical, that we not just up ambitions, but actually bring practical ways. And I was so encouraged to see what we are seeing through our Startup Awards process on carbon removal. But finally, it comes down to reducing food consumption and waste. Now, if I had to go into seeing what is the potential of that, if we all turn vegan, now we're going to reduce another 13%. Now, we all won't turn vegan. Least of all a Bengali like me, who is, can't possibly ever turn vegan. But what we realize is that if we make some conscious choices towards reducing our food consumption or habits, then there is a great possibility, and that comes back to us. But even more, if we reduce our food waste, there is a tremendous possibility there. Now, I was in ADIPEC week before last, and every table had a placard saying that in UAE we waste 30% of our food, so please don't waste. And I think it made all of us conscious. We need to make that consciousness happen, because everywhere we are wasting a lot of food. Even France, which is the most frugal, and sometimes restaurants penalize you if you waste food on the table. There's the food waste is 67 kgs per person per year. In the US, it's close to 100. In India, it's 50, and we can take comfort that India is even less than France, which is frugal. But then we also must remember and remind ourselves that there are always two Indias. There's a poor India, which subsidizes and averages it out for the rich India, which wastes as much as anywhere else in the world. So I think it's super important that we recognize that each of us, especially people like us, often with privilege, have a responsibility to do something about these things, about our habits. And this is where, when I was pulling this all together, it didn't start here, but it ended here with what PM Modi has said. It's for lifestyle, for environment. He called out 6 elements: save energy, save water, no single-use plastics, reduce waste, adopt healthy lifestyle, including yoga, which I'm as much aligned to, and adopting sustainable food systems. I think we need to make these conscious choices and go towards that. So along with what governments are going to do, what industries have to do, and what we have to do a lot. And when we pull all of that together, it just gives us that sliver of hope. Now, I've talked about less. I'm going to spend last 2-3 minutes about growth, why growth is an imperative. My team and I did an exercise to say that what happens to the sustainable SDGs, UN SDGs, the 17 SDGs, if we don't have growth. 12 out of those 17 get directly impacted. And that impact is felt the worst in places where people are already on the margins, in the developing world, in the global south, where there are so many people who have to come out of poverty, who have to have a better style and standards. And if we don't have growth, then they don't. So there is a narrative at various times that we must grow less. We say we must grow with less rather than grow less, because that doesn't help. And even the other 5 of them, we see that they get pretty strong second-order effects. So for example, peace and justice and sound institutions, all of them will get affected if we don't have a global economic order which grows, but of course it has to grow with less. And that future growth, we also have to remember, will be in the global south. And 2 places will be very, very important. The first is Africa, and the second is where we are sitting in India. Now, just in terms of a little more deep down into the statistics over here, Africa population is growing pretty fast, 2x. Growth in primary energy is more or less the same order. And increase in power generation is going to be significant because people are going to come into formal power generation, formal power systems. So that's going to be 5x, and hopefully it's going to be mostly through clean energy. And I'm hoping, because it's not a given. And India is slightly different. The population is reasonably stabilizing. Our energy growth is going to be faster because this is a country which suddenly has picked up steam on industrialization, not just serving India, but the rest of the world. It's an innovative society, it's an inventive society which is going into the place where industrialization can make a big difference for itself and the world. And as a consequence, the power generation is also going to go up quite significantly as we go forward. Now, I'm not going to talk about those because we have two very, very eminent speakers to talk about that. Dr. Mathur, Director General of International Solar Alliance, which has been doing world of work in bringing clean energy to especially the underprivileged, the less privileged parts of the world, and especially in Africa. And I'm not going to steal any of his thunder, but I've seen such fabulous work happening, which is empowering absolutely people on the margins. And Mike, you and I have talked about how we can really talk to Dr. Mathur to really bring scale to it and get real funding into that process. I talked to you about that. And then we are going to go to Mr. Atanu Chakraborty, who's been a very kind client for us. He's been the Secretary of Department of Economic Affairs, currently is the chair of the largest bank in the country. And he has a deepest view on India that you can get ever. So I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Mathur and then invite Mr. Chakraborty, and then we go into the rest of the day. Dr. Mathur. You want to, yeah, this is just the pointer which you have to use.
Very good morning to all of you. And Anish, you're a difficult act to follow. I won't even try to copy him, but focus on a few issues that I think interest all of us as we go ahead with the energy transition. And I will reiterate what Anish ended with, that we are going to see a huge growth in energy in the global south and in particular in Africa and India, which he had mentioned. I also want to stress the fact that energy growth, and that while energy will grow, the first step is to reduce the amount of energy that we need. And then we can talk of going on to various things. And the various scenarios that I paint are based on a future which is based on energy efficiency coming in before we go in for large-scale changes. Now, the first point that I want to make is that globally, we have seen an uptick in the amount of renewable energy. This is solar, this is wind, this is also large hydro, which we see growing in the years to come. So right now, in 2022, for which we have the numbers, we are somewhere in the vicinity of about 30%. This is good, but what it also means is that we are moving towards a future where we will see a lot more investment in renewables. In this country, a couple of months ago, there was a tender for round-the-clock firm renewable electricity. You know, for many years we have known that solar energy by itself is the cheapest electricity amongst all sources, but only when the sun is shining. But now, a mix of solar and wind and storage is providing us electricity at prices which are much less than that of new coal capacity. So at about 4 rupees per kilowatt hour, which is about 5 US cents per kilowatt hour, we are getting electricity which follows the load curve. New coal electricity is at about 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Huge difference. What it also means is that with this becoming the standard, financial institutions would be a lot less amenable to provide financing for fossil fuel-based power generation, specifically when you see that solar plus wind plus storage is already cost-effective. So I would expect that the growth would occur more as far as the upper curve is concerned, closer to the upper curve than to the lower curve. One of the big challenges here is nuclear energy. We foresee that in the very near future, as we see more and more retirements, particularly in the developed countries, we see the lower curve coming into play because retirements occur and they are not replaced by new nuclear capacity. But on the other hand, if new nuclear capacity can be added at prices which are somewhere comparable to that of renewable electricity, or even somewhat less than that of fossil fuel electricity, or possibly even at the level of fossil fuel electricity, 6.5 cents per kilowatt hour, we will see an increase. This particularly is true if smaller nuclear reactors become available, the so-called small modular reactors, SMRs. SMRs have the great possibility of being put where the load is. Therefore, you do not need to strengthen the transmission lines over long distances. So you would need to strengthen them for the renewable energy, renewable electricity in any case. But the second issue is that because they're not very large, the amount of nuclear fuel that they contain is also limited. And consequently, in cases of catastrophic failure, the kinds of impacts that they would have are much more limited than with large systems. Typically, what has happened is that safety and security costs have outweighed the costs of the nuclear power generation itself. And therefore, the larger you make the nuclear power generation, the larger is the base over which the safety and security costs are amortized. With the small modular reactors, what we are trying to see is something which is completely the opposite. Therefore, there is a possibility that we may see dispatchable nuclear power which is cost effective and based on smaller systems. This is an area which I think deserves to be watched with great a great degree of interest and concern as well, so that we move in the direction which leads both to lower costs as well as to greater safety. When we look globally, we are seeing that the prices of all the renewable energies, whether it be solar or onshore wind or nuclear, we expect them to drop over a period of time. I have written here the prices that we have currently seen, which is the 2021 prices, and what are the expected prices for 2030. And very clearly, we see a decline in all of those across geographies. It's far more in India for renewables, particularly solar and wind, but across the globe, you see these changes occurring. I wanted to do a similar graph for renewables. Now remember, storage batteries. Remember, storage batteries is not a source of electricity. It's a place where you store electricity which has been generated somewhere else and pass it on when the need is. That makes it somewhat different from sources of electricity, and therefore you have to see storage blended together with either solar or wind or both. That made it very difficult to compare here, and I thought it's better that we miss it out rather than include it. But the point that I'd like you to remember is that the prices of renewables are on the way down, the prices of fossil fuels are on the way up. So in the future, we would expect to see even higher prices for fossil fuels, even if somebody is willing to finance it, as opposed to the costs of renewables, which are on the way down and therefore are finding a larger amount of growth. I would like to add here to the point that Anish had made about developed and developing countries. He did not make it in exactly those terms, but the point remains that the vast amount of growth is occurring in the developing countries, which means that as far as zero carbon emissions are concerned, the developing countries have two challenges. The first is that the future growth has to be carbon-free, and the second is that the past growth also has to be converted to carbon-free. This is a moving target. And it's a moving target because the amount of energy needed every year increases. So if I'm looking at 2030, the demand for electricity will be more. And if you'd asked me this question last year, before this price of solar plus wind plus storage was discovered, if you'd asked me this question last year, I would have said, well, there is a challenge. And the challenge is that during the day, of course, we've got solar electricity, which is cheaper. But what happens at night? At night, you will have fossil fuel-based electricity, coal-based electricity, which is cheaper. Thankfully, that's no longer the case. Which also tells you how quickly the dynamics of technological change happen. I think it is worth our while to keep track of these changes, and particularly the inflection points as they occur. Okay. We also note that the vast amount of renewable energy penetration, solar and wind by nature only occur when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing. Therefore, it was a little surprising to see that in North Europe in particular, we see a lot of penetration of renewables. Those are not areas with great sun. But the good point is that because the grids are interconnected, the Norwegian hydroelectricity serves as a huge battery to provide carbon-free energy as and when needed. And because of this, you have days, many days in the year when, for example, Germany provides fully renewable electricity. This is a massive feat. And I think it behooves us to see how grids can be interconnected so that you can enable a larger degree of diversity in the generation mix in the areas that are connected together. Because as our Prime Minister said, the sun is always shining somewhere. And this therefore creates the opportunity for what we call as the One Sun, One World, One Grid program of connecting regions. So if you have regional interconnectors between, say, the Gulf countries and India, and between India and, say, East Asia, then while it is still sunlight in the Middle East, you can generate electricity from solar and pass it on through these regional interconnectors to India and on to East Asia. This is a huge issue as we look forward. Therefore, looking at the opportunities and looking at the kinds of costs regarding the connection of these grids becomes important. I will point out that connections for storage become the most important issue as we look ahead towards electrifying the globe. Now, what about other kinds of storage? Battery storage, for example. What we are seeing is that as far as battery technology is concerned, we have seen a huge decrease in prices. The price of battery technology has declined by almost 90% over, since 2008. In the next couple of years, this year, 2023, it's almost ending, but 2024, 2025, we will expect the prices of batteries to reach a level of about $100 per kilowatt hour of installed capacity, not delivered electricity, but installed capacity. What this would imply is that batteries and solar, and remember, I come from the Solar Association, therefore most of my numbers have to do with solar, but it could be as true with wind. Solar plus wind, solar plus storage could provide cost-effective power certainly before 2026. This makes it important to look at the developments in battery technology. Now, one of the things that we are seeing is that there are three kinds of things that are happening as far as the battery ecosystem is concerned. We are all very concerned about the fact that lithium-ion batteries are a problem in as much as the availability of lithium is concerned. That's true. But once lithium is identified as a critical mineral, it comes onto a list, then the various geological explorations pay a lot more emphasis to finding lithium than they did. In this country, for example, in the 1980s, I think, there was a geological exploration across the country. In the state of Jammu and Kashmir, a lot of bauxite was discovered. Well, when we went back and looked at that bauxite reserves last year, we also found a lot of lithium. Now, lithium had not even been mentioned in the geological survey carried out in the 1980s because it was not seen as a mineral which was worth looking at. And since then, there have been other discoveries of lithium. So the first thing that happens is once something is identified as a critical resource, a lot more attention is paid to it. The second thing that happens is that because of competitive pressures, the amount of material that is put into a battery reduces. And therefore, the amount of lithium that has gone into batteries today is 10 to 15% less than it was in 2005. This is because of pure competitive pressures. We have seen this occurring in other kinds, not only of batteries, but in almost everything. And this is a secular trend. It will continue to happen. But the third thing that happens is that not of the same kind inventions occur. So, for example, in this very country, you see that there are buildings that are powered by vanadium redox batteries. So this is a commercial operation. Again, I would like to stress the point that batteries by themselves are not as important as looking at them in conjunction with solar or wind or both. It's the economics of them together that determines whether it is viable or not. A large Indian company has recently bought a startup, I think out of England or the US or maybe both, which are manufacturing new kinds of batteries. Not just redox batteries, but also instead of lithium-ion, sodium-ion batteries. Sodium is much more available, much more, diversity is far greater than that of lithium, or of antimony-based batteries, iron-based batteries, and so on, which are far more easy to procure. Those materials are far more easy to procure than is lithium. The short point I'd like to leave you with is that we will see battery technology evolve in very different ways in different sectors and in different geographies. It is quite possible that in the years to come, you will see a bifurcation. The batteries that are used for the automobile sector are very different from the batteries used in the grid storage sector. The numbers are different, the volumes are different, though as somebody pointed out to me a few days ago, the amount of batteries needed for automobiles would be many times, at least 2 orders of magnitude more than those needed for grid storage. If this is indeed the case, this is a rounding off error, in which case what we will probably see is that the market is flooded with one kind of batteries, those needed for automobiles. But this remains to be seen. We are also seeing a massive change in the mobility patterns. Already, we see that as far as two-wheelers in this country are concerned, the vast number of two-wheelers that are being sold today are electric two-wheelers. In a previous job, I carried out a survey looking at the potential buyers of electric two-wheelers. And they said that the biggest thing that was hampering their decisions was the availability, or essentially the non-availability, of charging stations. Then we turned the question around and asked people who were already buyers of electric two-wheelers, who had already bought them, where they were charging their two-wheelers. And they said they were charging the batteries at home. What it implies is that charging stations will be important much more for range anxiety reasons than for actual charging, which therefore implies that the business models which will go around the manufacture of the charging station would need to be very different from the business model for the charging itself. So what we see is that another piece of the pie for the non-electricity sector would be the development of hydrogen, which is seen as the only energy source with zero carbon emissions if the hydrogen is made by the splitting of water using green electricity. I think it is important that while we learn to use hydrogen, and that hydrogen can come from any source, but ultimately we turn, as far as supply is concerned, to the growth of supply from green hydrogen, which is hydrogen which has been produced with a minimal amount of fossil fuel use and ultimately no amount of fossil fuel use. So what I think is important is that we need to follow what is happening around the world. All the countries in the world are trying out various aspects. We need to see what is happening. We need to learn from what is happening. We also need to provide absolute certification and training to people. This is important. You know, I went to engineering school at a time when we were told that hydrogen is the most dangerous chemical that is available, because when it burns with an invisible flame. You can actually walk into the flame without knowing it. We have managed hydrogen safe use in large industries, but we have never tried it in the retail industry. And if we are going for hydrogen transport or hydrogen for large-scale use, we are looking at those issues. Therefore, the need for certified people becomes important. This is an issue which is important in the renewables in general and green hydrogen in particular, that one of the challenges that we are seeing is that the vast amount of resources are being put into the capital investment costs. The operating costs are much lower. Typically, operating costs are somewhere in the vicinity of 1 to 2% of the end energy cost, the electricity cost or energy cost. This means that for the people who are investing in the system, it is far more important that the capital stock works and works efficiently. This means that efficiency has got a far greater importance now than it ever has had. So, to sum up, let me say that there are three things that are driving the energy transition. Decarbonization is obviously one of them, but I would suggest that so is digitalization. After all, if you look at a battery, it is a net user of electricity at the times when it is being charged, and it is a producer of electricity when you need electricity. How on earth do you keep track of this? The only way you can do it is through digital means. And whether it is solar panels on your roof, or whether it is the charging of electric vehicle infrastructure, digitalization becomes a key to how we manage the future. And the last thing, of course, is decentralization. The kinds of costs that we are seeing implies that the economies of scale are far less important than they were earlier. And the ability for people to have control over their own energy supply becomes more important. I will end by focusing on technology. We spoke about the importance of batteries. We spoke of the importance of the development of low-cost nuclear reactors. Also, I'll follow up on what Anish said. No matter what you do, there will be some amount of carbon emission occurring. It would need to be captured. Therefore, cost-effective carbon capture, utilization, and storage, CCUS, becomes important. The charging infrastructure is important, and the development of cost-effective electrolyzers becomes important. So these are our takeaways as far as technology is concerned. I will also focus on finance. We spoke of the need to see that CapEx is as cost-effective as possible. Because 1 megawatt of coal electricity is essentially replaced by approximately 2.7 megawatts of generating capacity of renewables, plus another 1.4 times as much storage capacity. This is a huge amount of capital expenditure. The capital expenditure is roughly double of what it would be if you were doing it on a coal plant alone. But as I said earlier, remember that the operating costs are near zero. This implies that the effectiveness of the usage of the capital cost becomes very important. And therefore, the risks associated with technology also become that much more important for the lenders. We believe that in order to pull in capital into the renewable energy space, it will be important to provide guarantees, particularly to investors, so that they can bring in money. As Anish said, we have seen a lot of money come into the renewable energy area. Less than 3% of all of it has gone into all of Africa. Why? Because investors are afraid that they will not get returns. But the failure of loans has been less than 2% in all of Africa. Failure of renewable energy loans has been less than 2%, which implies that guarantees would help in providing the confidence to investors to move money into regions such as Africa. Of course, we need to keep this money moving. And therefore, it is important that this is very quickly moved away from loan capital to becoming bonds, which are of great interest to the financing companies, to the pension funds, because they want to see a long-term flow of money occurring to them. Consequently, I suggest that bonds, maybe once they become operating assets, the loans are converted into bonds. And finally, capacity building. This is something on which I cannot speak enough. I spoke of the need for capacity building for hydrogen, but similarly, if you are looking at a large number of jobs in the renewable energy sector, you need people who are trained. I have a small farm which has a solar pump, but I need to take a mechanic who is well versed in solar pumps from a city 90 minutes away every time the system needs any, it hasn't needed any repair, but any kinds of maintenance. We need a lot greater diversity and the broad availability of people who can manage these systems. Let me end here, and Anish, I'm very sorry that I've taken so long, but many, many thanks for this opportunity.
Such a different perspective to this international audience. Now, I know, Mr. Chakraborty, you have to leave very quickly for another commitment which you had informed us earlier of. So we'll take a seat over here and listen to you for as much time as you can spend with us, and then we'll let you go.
Good morning, friends. Thanks very much, Anish, for giving me this opportunity to be here at Enrich. I'm honored and privileged. I've seen Enrich grow in size and stature under your helmsmanship over last 7 years, though it's 14th edition of Enrich. And it's great to see so many experts here who would discuss the energy transition aspects, though I find it very difficult to not polish off whatever is there on the table, as though you suggested a bit of restraint on that side. That aside, if we look at the growth, which is what Anish mentioned in his presentation, most of the international financial institutions have talked about growth for India in the range of 6.5% this year, and that is likely to be the trajectory over a period of time. And give and take the rate of inflation and growth varying between 6 to 8%, we are likely to see a nominal, on a nominal basis, Indian economy growing between 10 to 12% every year. And that's a kind of pace, if that continues over some period, should give us by 2045 to 2050 a total size of economy of about 30 trillion US dollars and around $21,000 per capita. Puts us somewhere a middle level European economy, largely pushed by export, by consumption. Maybe exports would also kick in. A lot of expenditure to support the growing lifestyle of such population in infrastructure, and also industries producing these goods would naturally mean that there would be a demand on energy. And all this growth is actually premised and predicated on excellent digital systems, deep financial inclusion, as well as tax reforms which have formalized the economy. So I do see a period of growth because if we are looking at what level of energy to which we need to make a transition, we must understand how much growth is going to be there in this economy. There would be inequalities, but that's a different subject altogether. Therefore, when we look at transition aspect, I would like to put that in 6 or 7 baskets. First is what kind of consumption basket we are looking at. We just had an excellent presentation by Dr. Mathur on how quickly the transition is even beating our expectation. We need to reduce carbon intensity. That is, frankly, it's a truism, if I may say so. But while we do so, we'll have to see which parts of fossil fuel also need to be pushed down. It shouldn't happen that if any of the renewables run into some amount of roadblock, and that does happen, then we have coal coming up or liquid fossil fuels coming up, and we have a larger carbon footprint. Maybe gas is a good balancing fuel, but that again requires debate. Idea is that we must understand what is going to be our energy basket in 2030, what is going to be in 2035, what is going to be in 2040, and what is going to be in 2045, and then keep trimming it as we go along, and not shy away from using less carbon generating fossil fuels also. That's a reality. Otherwise, we'll end up using more of coal, and that's not going to be too good for whatever little CO2 budget that's left for the planet. Coming to the next part, friends, the renewable energies are going to grow only if there is access to it. Today, if I want to sort of light my bulbs or run my AC on renewable fuels, I cannot do so. The structure of DISCOMs does not permit me to do so. Luckily, for use of gas, as a fuel in home, that is possible. However, improving the excess is one basket where I guess a lot of thought has to go in. For example, if a farmer wants to use a solar-powered pump, today there are schemes available, government schemes that are available, and government has taken a lot of initiatives on that. However, if only that aspect is addressed, a lot of diesel that is being used in the pumps across the country will go away. Therefore, improving access would improve demand for renewable energy, which people want to do. And that will call for lots of reforms. Not only that, if people want to even create their own renewable energy by, say, rooftops, solar panels, good, smart microgrids for them to enable them to sell it is another thing which is required. So this is the access part. The other is incentivization. A lot of talk goes for incentivization, and unfortunately, the history of this country has been incentives have gone to those who are either bulk producers or bulk users. It has not gone to larger number of people who would actually be users of this. Therefore, design of incentive systems. For example, if I wish to shift to renewable energy as a personal user, how I do get incentivized. That is where the demand comes in. And with direct benefit transfers, with capability of segmenting and reaching people directly, I think those kind of incentive mechanisms are much, much easy to develop. I'll go quickly to the fourth bucket, that is infrastructure. Now, infrastructure for renewable energy requires improving the grid size, because not only you have to locate these, say, solar projects where there is adequate sun available, but also adequate land available. So there could be coal mines, or there could be large area in the desert tracts, or many other places where there is land available. In that case, you have to shift power to the consumption centers, where possibility of locating large amount of panels is normally not there. Therefore, huge amount of investments in grids, in gas transmission pipelines, in smart grids, and the list can go on, and that is where the role of government, both incentives as well as infrastructure, that is where the role of government would come in to push either through reforms or through direct incentives would really be the key for making this transition to happen. That brings me to the next area of reform. Today, if you are using power, I'm time and again coming to power because that would be a major area of usage. DISCOMs at the end provide you power in lump. That is, they provide both infrastructure as well as commodity. They refuse to reform. So even if there is a demand, they will be pushing perhaps a very dirty power. Therefore, reforms at that end, reforms in financing. Dr. Mathur just mentioned about bond market. I see just beginning of that with Indian government treasury bonds, that's the government securities, G-SECs as they're known here, are already becoming part of global indices. However, a lot needs to be done downstream for corporate bonds, developing a deeper market so that investors can really invest in them and get out of them. And also that reduces the volatility in the yields of those kind of bonds. Only then really the financing of these kind of long-term projects would happen. Otherwise, with very short-term finances that banks have, we can only have disasters that we saw in the first decade of this millennium. That brings me to the last item of financing. Financing will go to the areas A, which are tested, B, which are viable, C, where the returns are better. Therefore, they always would associate, let's face it, risk with new type of energies or those forms of energies which have caused, not yet proven or have some amount of probability associated with them. Now, to make it happen, possibly some amount of multilateral finance or guarantees, as Dr. Mathur has talked about, very difficult for governments to provide because of contingent liabilities that they bring along with them. However, there could be bonds as a solution, or there could be more elegant solutions that could be worked out. Otherwise, despite having those solutions on hand, we'll find it very, very difficult to do so. I found one very interesting case of a national infrastructure finance organization which has set up a platform for financing equity for green finance with I guess a British organization, and that was a very interesting, though very small step to start with. I guess need to happen along with as the demand for finance in that area goes up. So these are some of the baskets in which possibly we need to look at how energy transition could be phased through. However, we need to be careful. At the end, I will add a small caveat. Everything that glitters is not always gold. So while we move into new forms of energy, we need to always understand what are the risks associated with them. Unless those are also brought forth, otherwise, many times the narrative tends to paper over them. And when the things really hit us in the face, the faith in those products really goes away. So it's important that we discuss the downsides as well. It's a bit unpalatable at this stage to talk about it, but I thought I will touch upon that as well while finishing. Thanks very much.
Thank you. We'll conclude the session because we are behind time, and I know that you have given very, very precious time, both of you, for us. So very good. I'm going to just make one request that we get to work with you through the year, and we come back to this gathering next year with exactly those kinds of issues like financing and others which we have talked about. And I say that for a reason, that we as KPMG are really looking at creating those structures which will really make this large-scale finance into these high-risk or new areas happen. So nobody better than you both to work with. So I'm looking forward to that. Thank you so much, sir. Right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mathur. It's okay, it's okay.